You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Sabah al-Khair, good morning dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Bringing you the news and views and the untold side of the Palestinian struggle for freedom from a Palestinian perspective.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Remembered. Here we are on day 342 days of genocide, fast approaching the 1-year anniversary of this latest uptick in the genocide on Palestinians. Today we're joined by Tan Safi, who's a Palestinian activist, documentary maker, filmmaker, an extraordinary human being. Tan is a volunteer media and comms producer for the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. Tan was in Turkey and in the Mediterranean for the best part of this year, trying to get the ships and the flotilla through to Gaza to break the siege. An honor to have you with us, Tan. Good morning.
Bahu, thank you so much for having me.
Tan, tell us a little bit about your Nakba story. How did you and your family end up on this colony?
Sure. So my background is Palestinian, Lebanese, Syrian, bit of a meze plate, as I like to say. And I guess the thing that really prompted my family to finally leave the region was they were living in Lebanon in the 80s. My parents both met in Lebanon. They were living in an area called Shweifet. And of course, around the same time in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon for the second time, they were sheltering in a shed near their house. A missile was fired toward them. My brothers were there. They were 2 and 6 years old at the time, and my grandparents. And the missile landed in the ceiling of the shed, and it didn't explode. So they are absolute miracles. They came out of the shed, obviously very shaken up, and that was kind of the last straw. So they finally were able to move over here to the colony, and I was born a few years later.
So how did they get to Lebanon first? What the first dislocation, was it a Naksa 167 or Nakba 48?
Yeah, it was in the 40s originally. So my dad's side are from Nablus, and my aunt and Syrian, and my mum's side are Syrian Lebanese. Yeah, they had to leave at the time, and like I said, they met in Lebanon at the University of Beirut, American University there.
And do you know much of that story, your grandpa leaving Nablus?
It's funny, actually, not in a ha-ha way, but I was actually sheltered for most of my life from their trauma. They didn't really share very much. Neither my mum or my dad told me very much at all. I think it was a repercussion of trying to assimilate in the society here and move forward with their lives. I mean, I hardly was spoken to in Arabic, let alone understood where we came from or our full lineage. And it took me to getting to kind of like late teens, early adulthood, where I started asking questions. And my mum in particular started sharing some stories, some horrific stories. So they've been through a lot, and the generations, it's endless.
What's a coping mechanism? Number one, to how do you deal with that trauma as an individual, the dislocation, the loss? But then also, coming from sliding door moment or that miracle moment of a missile protruding through the ceiling of a shed, and somehow the rest of you surviving, and you getting born here, then making it here, the oppression of the state here and forcing you to find a way to be as white as possible, as quick as possible, sees you negate your own experience. And internalize that colonialism, another layer of trauma.
Exactly.
Tell us about your time in Turkey and in the Mediterranean with the Freedom Flotilla Coalition.
Sure. I was, like many other people, in such a heavy state of despair before I went to my cousin's house, Rahab Sharida, who's an amazing documentary filmmaker, an amazing person, an encyclopedia, such a powerhouse. And she told me about the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. I decided to join. Within days, I was on a plane heading toward Turkey, and somewhat as a participant, but also with my documentary skills and having worked for digital giants around the world, I was also very much heavily supporting content creation for the social media there. So interviewing participants, focusing on the siege, which is really what the Freedom Flotilla is about. We were aiming to deliver 5,500 tons of humanitarian aid, which was desperately needed back in April. But the main goal of the Freedom Flotilla is to break the siege, and it has been going since 2008, where two small fishing boats, this is how it kicked off, two tiny fishing boats actually managed to break the siege and successfully reach Gaza. That happened a few more times. And then Israel started intercepting other flotillas. There's been about 35 attempts between 2008 and 2018 before COVID hit. And in all of those interceptions, volunteers, humanitarians, everyday people from all over the world have been tasered, abducted, taken to Israeli prison, interrogated and deported. There's been endless accounts of violence. And of course, in 2010, we had a big moment where the Mavi Marmara, which is a Turkish organization, that was one of our flotillas, was intercepted by the IOF, and very tragically and violently, 10 of the volunteers were killed. 9 were killed instantly and 1 died after laying in a coma for 4 years. So my role this year was to build our social media so that we could raise awareness about the flotilla, because so many people had never heard of it before. So many people didn't understand what the siege or the blockade meant. No one really knew the history. Everyone kind of sees this as kicking off in October last year. So within a few months, we managed to build an amazing platform and create educational videos, animated explainers, and reports on the realities being faced in Gaza, and amplifying Palestinian voices there as well.
What are the links for the Freedom Flotilla Coalition? Because we'll put those in our podcast. On Instagram, it is
Gaza Freedom Flotilla.
Gaza Freedom Flotilla. So make sure you go to the podcast, you get a link there to follow Tan's work and that of their colleagues. Tan, we had 5,500 tons of aid in April.
Yeah.
It's now September.
Yeah.
The situation has got diabolically worse. The flotilla never left. Tell us about some of the challenges and what we might be doing to try and address that.
What we've seen happen to the flotilla is an iota of what Palestinians in Gaza face every day, where their movements are restricted, where anyone who wants to show solidarity or active participation in easing some of their life in some capacity has a siege imposed on them, and that is protected by international governments. So the 5,500 tons of aid really is a drop in the ocean for what was needed, right? It wasn't going to save Gaza. It never was, but it was so desperately needed at the time. And it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks into me arriving in Istanbul where we had one delay, and we pushed it back a few days, and that was okay. We managed to psychologically cope with that. You know, the energy was palpable. I was watching these rooms fill up every single night. The more volunteers that came, I saw 10 people on the first night, 50 the second, 100 the next, until there were about 1,000 of us just ready to go. But the real hit was when Guinea-Bissau withdrew their flag off of our ship, and that was due to Israeli and US pressure. I learned a lot about maritime law, in that every single ship that sails needs a flag, and that flag becomes representative of the ship. So essentially, the ship becomes the country. And without Guinea-Bissau, we couldn't sail. And it was an awful moment. I can't really put it into words, the heartbreak. All of us were just devastated that we had this tangible hope that was ripped away from us by the forces that be. And the main concern, of course, was that we just weren't going to reach Gaza when we said that we would, giving Palestinians in Gaza hope that no longer existed. And we didn't know when or if it would happen again, if we would get reflagged, who by. We had every single person working around the clock trying to get another flag from another country, petitions all over the world for their home countries. The Irish solidarity was very real. They tried their absolute best. But yeah, nothing came through.
It's just shocking. It's in that moment that you've realized just how much Western complicity, exists. And when you talk about Guinea-Bissau, like it's a tiny little country that had chosen to flag the boats.
Yeah.
And you think about every other country on earth that could flag these boats, the Arab countries, the Muslim countries that, speak about, pontificate about, and you go back to the Mavi Marmara, which was flagged under Turkey, and all of the pontificating of all of these leaders, quote unquote, and rulers. And here we have Erdogan, who last year in sort of May or whatever was running for elections and was running almost a Palestine campaign.
Yeah.
And is exposed brutally in October. But now his crew, his forces, his, legislation, his police are stopping the ships.
Mm-hmm.
They could be flagged under Turkey's flag.
Yeah. Okay, so once the deflag happened and months had passed, Handala was still sailing across the UK and Europe, highlighting the government complicity. In that time, our break the siege ships in Istanbul were docked in the port, and currently the Turkish port authorities are not allowing those ships to sail. So our biggest hurdle right now is getting those ships freed so that they can get to Gaza. We actually have demonstrators from Mavi Marmara and Turkish allies who have locked themselves to the port in Istanbul, and they've been there now for just over a week. So we need to show as much solidarity for those people as humanly possible. They refuse to leave until the Turkish port authorities grant them release.
And Turkey did it once before, they can do it again, and it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people say, well, they just don't want you to die out in sea. Well, at the end of the day, the focus should be on the fact that the IOF or any NATO countries who do that are criminals, war criminals, and the focus should be put on ensuring that they allow safe passage for these ships to actually get to Gaza. It's so strange that the focus here, the roles are reversed.
What should be happening is it shouldn't come onto civil society to try and break the siege. The world should be breaking the siege.
100%. Look, I think we're just reminded every single second of every single day that all of these governments that show solidarity during a press conference, it's all words and no action. They are all complicit. And I need to really clarify that the Freedom Flotilla's mission was legal. Everything had been done correctly. This is a humanitarian mission in a time where people are being forced to starve, where people are being genocided. And the way that international law and governments work against those who are trying to ease some of that suffering is just abhorrent. I don't think the mind can even properly process that. We've been told our whole lives that governments and law are there to protect the people. And we can just see now that that has never been the case.
It's never been the case, absolutely. And we've got no clearer example than the Land Forces conference that was held in Victoria, in Naarm, in Melbourne this past week. I was saying to somebody, a baker makes bread, and every day he sells bread, and the next day he makes bread and sells bread, and he takes that money and he pays rent, buys food, whatever it might be. But if you're a weapons manufacturer, and you make bullets, let alone anything else, and they sit on the shelf, you can't buy bread. So you need to sell the bullets. People or countries, communities end up with enough bullets. They don't need any more bullets. And the only way that you can get them to buy more bullets so that you can buy more bread is for them to use their bullets. And in a world that is devoid of humanity, weapons manufacturers sit on the investment portfolios of the rich, and as they just kill the unnecessary. This is late stage capitalism. Are you worthy of life, or are you at the end of a bullet?
The fact that there can be so many shipments still to occupied Palestine loaded with weapons in a genocide that has been deemed illegal by every single human rights body in the world, by the International Court of Justice, by the ICC, by everyone, right? But these ships are allowed happily and safely to sail to Palestine, and our tiny drop in the ocean worth of aid and our beautiful humanitarians are stopped in every which way is just ridiculous. I mean, again, I think we've run out of language to use to be able to describe these things. It's just overwhelmingly disturbing.
It's so disturbing. And we should say Western complicity, whether it's the US 24/7, 365 supply chain. I mean, the war stops tomorrow if Biden stops shipments today.
Exactly.
During the week, our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, welcomed the UK's decision to stop 10% of their arms licenses. She welcomed it. We need more than just welcoming that. We need to be sanctioning this rogue apartheid state. We should also say that these shipments have not all been safe. The Yemenis have made sure that some of them are not that safe.
You're listening to Radical Radio 3CR.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
Stay locked to 3CR.
Tan, the thing that I keep speaking about to people, and I don't have time for people who don't realize what's going on in Gaza, is genocide, that can see what's happening in Gaza and are quote unquote okay with it. Because if they're quote unquote okay with a Palestinian being genocided in Gaza, they're okay with me being genocided here.
That's right.
We have to be very clear. Today it's in Palestine, but in fact, everybody is a Palestinian if Israel's allowed to win. Your feelings of hope. I know that we have the disappointment, but you spent a lot of time in Turkey. The solidarity that you were talking about, the Irish, but what was the feeling there?
Spending time in Turkey was amazing. It filled my heart with hope. It filled every single inch of me with hope. It wasn't just the Turkish, although their solidarity, the everyday person there is amazing. Their solidarity with Palestine is very real and staunch. But it was also meeting these participants, these volunteers from all over the world, 7-year-olds from Scotland through to people from South Africa, Malaysia, Germany, Brazil. I'd never been around that many people who understood, who didn't need to be spoon-fed, who didn't use hurtful or problematic language, who would have given everything. And we know how dangerous this mission is, okay? Let's be real. Literally, they would have given everything, their lives, to do something for Gaza. It was so overwhelming to me that this many people all around the world really cared, because I think we've been forced into this global displacement. Often the diaspora feels so alone. We've been screaming into the void for decades, most of us, and no one has heard, no one has been there, no one has understood. So to suddenly be surrounded by these people was just the most beautiful experience of my life.
How do you cope coming back here then?
I'm not coping. I am heartbroken. I I mean, my travels also meant that I followed Handala through to the UK after we were deflagged and there was no movement happening. I decided to go, and I lived on Handala for a little bit in Rotterdam. I met beautiful people there. I went to London for a Handala event, and eventually I relocated to Ireland. I'd never been there before, and obviously we're all aware of the solidarity there, as we talked about. I ended up living with a Palestinian mum and her surviving daughter, Hala and Shahid. And the connection there was just the most beautiful, kind of created our own little adopted chosen family. And the love and the shared stories, despite having such different upbringings, you know, from Gadigal to Gaza, quite literally, to leave all of these people and to be back in a colony that feels very isolated, where it feels like not much is happening and not people don't care, has shattered me. But my hope remains, because it has to. I have been born here with every single privilege in the world. My passport allowed me to go to Turkey, to go to the Netherlands and to the UK and to Europe. I'm allowed to do what I want when I want. And so I'm going to do something with that. That's exactly why I do what I do, despite how destroyed I am on the inside. There's no choice other than to be human. And that's where my hope comes from, to see the strength of people like Hala and her beautiful little girl. If they're strong, we must be, because there are still children who are alive in Gaza that we need to keep fighting for.
I mean, we have to remember that the Palestinians in Gaza have not given up. There's no excuse for us to give up.
Exactly.
And it's beautiful, that concept of solidarity, and it's true wherever you go. I mean, I was at an airport recently, and I only travel in a Palestine t-shirt and smiles and whatever, but a guy sort of fought his way against traffic to come up and make sure that I realized that he was wearing a Palestine t-shirt too. And those little moments of recharge let us know that we're not alone, that increasingly, people have seen Israel for what we've always known it to be. Absolutely. You know, when we talk about it in the context of settler colonialism and compare it to this colony, what's happening in Gaza today is no different to what happened here.
No.
1770, 1780, the first fleet, the ethnic cleansing, the displacement, the only difference is the weaponry. Be under no illusion, if Arthur Phillip had an Apache helicopter and an F-16 and 2-ton bombs, he too would have done exactly what the Israelis are doing to us today.
Absolutely. And I mean, the only other difference as well, when we're talking about the genocide here in the colony, is the coverage, because so many things are hidden from the everyday quote unquote Australian. They don't know, they don't care, they haven't been educated in school, they haven't been given the chance to expand their minds and hearts, and they go on their merry privileged ways. And yeah, it's that the lack of, I mean, this is all part of the system, right? Keep it quiet, keep it hidden, keep it suppressed. Like, they try to destroy our history. They try to destroy our books, our photos, our videos, all that archival footage. We have endless amounts of things that were just burned and destroyed. And every single colonized country shares that same story. They share that same history, and they share that understanding, and no one should have to. I mean, what is this world? What is this world where we realize all we have is each other?
Well, this is the thing. Every colonized person on earth sees themselves in Palestinians, and every colonizer sees themselves in Israel. And if we go back to October 8th, the reflex action of this colony to immediately support Israel, that saw the Opera House be lit up, joint statements by both sides of politics in support of, and, you know, the demonization. It's just a level of sickening as to beg a belief. But one of the things that I've really been heartened by, and it's not just here on this colony, but like in movements all over the world, is the increased understanding of those that support Palestine understanding that support for Palestine cannot be disassociated from support for the indigenous people of whatever land they're on.
Absolutely. I learned while I was in Ireland that there's a resurgence of people learning Irish. It's October last year because they don't want to identify with the English history and the English language. And I just thought that was amazing. So yeah, people are reconnecting with their culture, learning more about themselves. And of course, yes, the world has finally seen. I always go back to, though, at what cost? Because Shahid should have her sister with her, Hala should have her husband and her child. And that's just one family. At what cost did it take for everyone to get here? There's this idealistic, almost childlike part of me that just still says, like, this didn't have to happen, because I can't accept it. I just refuse to accept this.
It's horrific that we had to get to this point for the world to realize that what Israel's doing is abhorrent and wrong. What it has been doing is abhorrent and wrong. That if we don't stop Israel, then everybody's a Palestinian. Forward. The simplest thing, what should Israel have done after October 7 was comply with international law, end the occupation, stop sieging, stop ethnic cleansing, stop colonizing, like normal good person stuff. What could Israel have done? What it didn't need to do, which is what it's programmed to do, is continue to be barbarically evil and genocidal, continue to ethnically cleanse Palestine.
I think one of the most disturbing parts of all of this is that it all comes down to money and power. And at the end of the day, if you have all the money in the world, what do you really have if you also have the lives of hundreds of thousands of people on your conscience? I know that they don't have one, but all for greed, all for theft. It's insane to me. It's like watching a serial killer documentary or listening to a podcast and trying to understand the mind of one serial killer. But in this instance, it's millions of them.
And for listeners, keep an eye out for Kneecap. They're an Irish band who a decade or more ago rejuvenated the Irish language and rapped in it, and they talk about the Troubles and the IRA. So that movie is coming out in a few weeks in on this colony. So make sure you keep an eye out for Kneecap. We've been joined by Tan Safi, who's a Palestinian activist, documentary and filmmaker. Tan volunteered for the Freedom Flotilla Coalition in media and comms, and they were their producer. So make sure you follow Freedom Flotilla Coalition. There'll be a link in the podcast. Tan, we've got a minute left. Do you want to send us on our merry way with some thoughts?
I think one of the scariest things at the moment is how normalized all of the violence is becoming for a lot of people. And we need to process that. We need to process the numbness and desensitization if you're feeling it. And remember, again, that there are still so many babies, children, human beings who are alive, who we need to keep fighting for. And I know it's hard. I know how hard it is. And I'm not going to lie and say that I'm strong every single day. Of course I'm not. But we need to keep going, because if we don't have ourselves, if we don't have our community and our allies, what do we have?
Indeed, Tan. Very quickly, you're going to go back?
I am. Absolutely. It's not over. It will be over when it's done, when it's over, it will be over when we see a permanent ceasefire and when we see a free Gaza. So until that day, I will keep going back. My plans at the moment are to relocate to somewhere in the Mediterranean. I won't disclose that information right now. I'll keep making content and try my very best to raise as much awareness as I can.
Until liberation.
Akid.
That was Tan Safi, Palestinian activist extraordinaire, documentary filmmaker, volunteer on the Freedom Flotilla Coalition. Make sure you follow Gaza Freedom Flotilla on Instagram. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and remember, there's never been a better time for a free Palestine.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.